This video was difficult to write, which is ironic given the topic. The controversial and equally sensitive topic of difficulty in video games is a tender spot for the community. The main question in mind for this particular video is the question of, should games have an easy mode? What this means is all games should have easier modes to play them. It may seem like a small, silly question, but it's subject to a feverish debate with strongly held opinions on both sides of the spectrum. I decided to write this video because recently it was the 10th anniversary of Dark Souls, and I also just recently played the game Nioh, which is within the subgenre of the poorly defined Souls-like. Quick review of the game, by the way, real quick. Great game. Had a few problems, but overall very well done, and I enjoyed it a lot and I recommend it. The reason why this anniversary is important to the context of difficulty in games is that Dark Souls, the Souls-like subgenre, and From Software games in general, upon every release are subject to the question of should they have an easy mode. From Software, the developer of these games, which include Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and the upcoming Elden Ring, have made their name, and of course the subgenre Souls-like, with these games that are often described as brutally difficult. All the games have a single difficulty mode, which is their inherent challenging selves, and upon each release, a section of the gaming community rises up and argues that the Souls-like games should have an easy mode. This is typically the gaming journalists at the forefront of this argument, while another section rises up and argues they shouldn't, which is just fans of the Souls-like subgenre. It happens every single time, and it's honestly a hilarious mess to watch. It's been going on for years with each release. Hard games existed before Dark Souls. I mean, even Demon Souls existed before Dark Souls. But for some reason, these games, Dark Souls in particular, are always the chosen hill for these biblical battles. So I know while it doesn't cover the scope of the entire argument about difficulty, the focus of this video will be sort of mainly about the Souls games and the associated Souls-like subgenre, just as a talking and reference point for the arguments about difficulty. We all know the Souls games aren't the only difficult games in the world, and they're also not the first. It's just being used as a reference point. I said this would be difficult to write because this seemingly simple question is actually complex with multiple layers. In my eyes, no side is exactly right, and each holds argument strong enough to take me over to the other side if I had been exposed to one side more than the other. I've decided with this video that I will challenge myself to take a particular side. I hate calling it joining a particular side. It's like some Democrats versus Republicans garbage that I don't want to get involved in, because I think both sides have valid points. I'm just going to choose the one at this moment I think has the most points to convince me right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly discuss many of the arguments from each side and then tell you what side I agree with the most at this moment. I'll admit, while researching this, I changed my stance with intense frequency. I just kept jumping from one side to the other. Even while writing this and researching it and finding more information, I just kept being pulled to each opinion. From there, I'll break down why I chose each particular opinion. Additionally, I'll ask my own questions that I've thought of that I believe provide interesting elements to this set of thoughts, and answer those questions based on research and plenty of thinking while showering and pooping. This is a reminder, many of these comments are all heavily in the context and vicinity of the Souls-like subgenre. So each side, just for the sake of simplicity, is the people who support adding an easy mode, I just called pro easy mode, and then the people who are against adding an easy mode, I called anti-easy mode. It's just I'm just simply distincting them. There's of course a lot of gray area to it, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call them that. I will introduce the arguments for the pro-easy side first. And firstly, their arguments often revolve around a utilitarian approach. They want all games to be more inclusive and accessible to all people. The addition of an easy mode is a tool the developers can use so that more people can play their game. They argue on the side of those who are less skilled and with disabilities, be it physical or mental, and say that not having an easy mode is not fair to them. They argue having an easy mode does not impact the experience of people playing on the harder difficulties, and that the idea of an intended experience isn't possible to all players when there's a single difficulty level, because some players are better than others, thus their experience will be relative in difficulty to how good that player is at games, while for some it could be much simpler, and to others it could be unfairly punishing. They often call people on the anti-easy side gatekeepers and elitists who are barring other people from getting a valuable experience just because they're not good enough, and thus prevents the people who are more interested in discovery or story and lore from being able to experience those aspects of whatever particular title, and that the community is toxic and makes gaming look bad, especially with get good culture, because it's just telling people to just get good at games and stop whining essentially. They argue the games should respect the player's time, because not everybody has the time to learn bosses to defeat them, and that people should be able to play games however they want, and the idea of people playing games however they want is more important than the idea of game developers should be able to make whatever games they want. And they argue that people who are on the anti-easy side only want to show off a sense of superiority with the fact that they have beaten a game like Dark Souls. Now the arguments on the anti-easy mode side. Firstly, they argue that an easy mode, when a game isn't designed inherently with one, like a game like Dark Souls, is intrusive to the vision of the developer. They are pro-developer's intended experience. They believe that the developers should be able to make whatever games they want. They argue that including an easy mode would diminish the experience even of those playing at the quote intended difficulty, and would tarnish the idea of a shared experience. While the pro-easy mode's nemesis is their created vision of an elitist gatekeeper, the anti-easy crew's greatest nemesis is the gaming journalist. Mostly specific to Dark Souls, but they argue that the oppressive and difficult nature of the game is part of the narrative and overall experience. Reducing the difficulty would diminish the impact that the world has, because struggling and overcoming is the experience. And while get good is often used in toxic ways, it's often meant to represent that with patience and learning, you can get better and you can overcome. It's not that you're not good, it's that you can get better. And there are many more arguments for both sides, and I'll likely touch on some of them as I talk. Many of the arguments, including the ones I mentioned, aren't done justice without full context of what they're talking about either. I tried to hide what my decision was when writing out the main arguments for each side, and it likely didn't work. In my controversial opinions video from a few weeks ago, I said how Dark Souls wouldn't be negatively impacted by the inclusion of an easy mode. Dark Souls wouldn't be negatively impacted by an easy mode. What is my final decision? Now I am on the anti-easy mode side. Saying it like that, of course, saying I'm on a side, it feels really gross, and I can't say it being 100% comfortable with that, and it does make me feel like I'm doing some moral wrong, even though I'm not. The other side has just successfully framed it as such to where the people on the anti-easy mode side are the villains. Now, this is the entire reason why I made this channel, for situations like this. I was on the opposing side of the argument just recently. Then once I got involved with the subject further, looking heavily at arguments for both sides and constantly flip-flopping, I'm right now on this side of the argument. This was a difficult problem to take a side on, and I learned a lot of different arguments and had my opinion challenged and changed. I'm not even confident that I'll stick with this side for my entire life. This could could just be the opinion of this particular instance of me in this time. Now I'm going to try to address the arguments listed above with further explanation for a bit. The first one I want to address is that by taking this stance, I am by no means saying that people with disabilities shouldn't be able to play games. I want everybody possible to be able to play games, and an easy mode would certainly help many with that. That is what the pro easy mode side is arguing. With an easy mode, more people will be able to enjoy the game. This is one of the thoughts that has had a strong impact on which side I'm on. But easy mode does not equal accessible. The pro easy often make the anti-easy seem like villains and say that their opinion means that disabled people can't play games because of elitists like the anti-easy. They often champion a sort of moral superiority for assisting the disabled. This was one of the arguments that kept me on that side for so long, because I want everybody to be able to experience games. Somebody in the unfortunate situation of having a disability or limitation shouldn't exclude them. Once I realized that the argument for an easy mode often doesn't help the disabled, I switched sides. There are unfortunately many types of disabilities. There are motor, auditory, visual, mental, and other types of limitations. The argument for an easy mode doesn't help the people with disabilities inherently. It just helps the less skilled and those who don't have the patience to overcome the obstacles. Just because a game has an easier mode, it doesn't mean it's any easier for a disabled person to play the game. Just because an enemy does less damage to the player, doesn't mean that all of a sudden somebody with a motor disability can now play the game. This type of accessibility isn't accessible at all for those in need of it. Easy mode and accessible modes are entirely different, and I completely support the addition of intense accessibility options to every game, even Dark Souls. Accessibility options to help disabled gamers is not the same as an easy mode. Accessibility options are helping the visually impaired by making things easier to see with different colorblind modes, more visual indicators, and things like that. Helping the auditory impaired with visual indicators for sound, better subtitles, and other features to help indicate what sounds are being made. Helping the motor impaired by allowing for a fully customizable button layout, having the option to use whatever controller they require, having assisted aim and stability, and other features to help them play more comfortably. The current best game at this stuff, to my knowledge, is The Last of Us 2. It has intense accessibility options, and it helps those who need the help to be able to interface with the game at all. These features make the game more accessible by helping them overcome the difficulties that were preventing them from playing the game in the first place. An easy mode doesn't do this for them, ultimately not helping many of the disabled at all. Thus why I am pro accessibility, anti-easy. They are two different things, and equating them together is disrespectful to the disabled community. This argument of mine is flawed though, in that I haven't spoken with people within the disabled community to see how correct it is. I don't know anybody within that community or much else about it, and it would be interesting to get their input down the line. And I do also concede that an easier mode or options can be a form of making the game more accessible to those with disabilities. But again, simply applying just an easy mode is a band-aid to a bigger problem. This line of thinking also leads to the pro easy mode people saying that the developers need to respect the player as well, which I disagree with. Fundamentally, I actually do agree, but I don't think From Software disrespects their audience at all. It's not like they're adding predatory microtransactions, they're not treating you like an idiot, they're not making extremely grindy and worthless time loops that all they do is extend the game without actually offering any more quality. They make these games because they trust that their audience can handle it. They're making a niche type of game and have successfully cultivated an audience that appreciates them for it. They continue to make games that challenge the player, but challenge the player fairly. This is pure respect from the developer to the player. They trust that the player will be able to persevere and overcome the challenges they present. If they didn't trust the player, they wouldn't make games the way they have been and continue to do. All the player has to do is trust that the developer will make it learnable and fair. The fact that this is such a niche genre, I believe, is another strong argument. From Software is developing a game series for a niche. It just happened to garner a larger audience. Simply said, it's not a game for everybody, and that's a good thing. If all games were for everybody, well, you'd kind of end up with this disappointing homogeneous mess that the modern AAA landscape is. I believe that gaming is for everybody, but not every game is for everyone. If you try to please everyone, you please nobody. There are games out there that are not for me, and that's okay. I don't blame people for wanting the games to have an easy mode, because they're so interesting with the deep mechanics and beautiful, mysterious worlds. There's a lot there I'm sure a lot of people want to see. It's just blocked off by something that they have to put an actual effort in on, rather than it being handed to them. You can't walk into the salty Splatoon saying you had cereal and orange for breakfast. I mean, that's pretty much what I have every day for breakfast, but what can you do? There's still thousands of games out there I'm sure they'd be able to enjoy, and there's a bit of acceptance that has to be self-administered by admitting that, hey, this isn't a game for me. Not all games are, and that's okay. At this moment, there are only 6, coming 7, From Software games in the Souls-like subgenre, and a handful from other developers. And that's such a small amount of games that are out there. All that has to be done is to admit that it's not for you and move on. I mean, it's not like they'd finish it anyway. Most people don't finish games to begin with, but that's a different story. Just because you bought the game doesn't mean you're owed its ending. Like I said, most people don't get there anyway. You did not purchase the right to see the end. You purchased the right to play an experience that gets you to the end. There's an active component required of the player. The nature of the interactive medium is you interact with it, and the developers wanted to create a specific experience for people to have. It's up to the player to engage with that experience. Requesting for them to change their vision is fairly selfish. The developer had a vision for a world and experience that they wanted to create for their audience. Dark Souls' vision is a dark, desolate, and hopeless world. The difficulty of the game enforces this narrative. The game wouldn't feel heavy and oppressive if you walked around and could demolish the hardest boss while scrolling Reddit at the same time on your first go. Honestly, the difficulty is learnable as well. The hardest Souls-like game you play is always the first one. Hidetaka Miyazaki had a vision, and he created that vision. He shouldn't have to conform his vision to others by force, only by critique. To quote Miyazaki, he says, "We want everybody to feel that sense of accomplishment. We feel if there's different difficulties, that's going to segment and fragment the user base. People will have different experiences based on that. This is something we take to heart when we design games." This isn't Miyazaki's take on his idea of a shared experience. He wants everybody playing the game to experience the same world so that everybody discussing the game is on the same playing field. I'm going to admit that the following argument I'm about to make was crafted by me based on assumptions about Miyazaki when it came to designing Dark Souls based on general information that we do know. This is also an argument specifically skewed towards Dark Souls itself and not other Souls-like games. Dark Souls is heavy with themes about struggling, suffering, and overcoming. Miyazaki is heavily inspired by the manga Berserk by Kentaro Miura. May you rest in peace, Miura. Thank you for what you have given the world. I've only seen the 1997 anime of Berserk, and I love it. I intend to very soon begin reading the manga. Berserk is a dark fantasy set in a brutal world based on a fictional medieval Europe. The world is dark, it's cruel, it's littered with the evils of humanity and the corruption of power. Some of the core themes of Berserk are about struggling, suffering, and trying to overcome by finding your own purpose and happiness within this terrible world. The main character, Guts, experiences pure suffering, struggling, and going through absolutely unimaginable things throughout his entire life, and yet he's still trying to live and find purpose within this world, and overcome that past and grow as a person. To go through all this and still try to retain humanity. is to the point where in the manga one of the important characters calls him the struggler because of how hard he fights against the tides of fate. That's exactly what Dark Souls is. The characters in the game, including the player character, are part of the undead. Once you're undead, you begin to slowly go crazy, lose your mind, and go hollow, which, to put it very simply, is a state of uncontrollable madness. The undead go hollow more quickly when they have no goal, purpose, or humanity. If an undead has their goals and their purpose, they can remain lucid and continue on as long as they have their purpose and goals. The player is the chosen undead, but they have hints of going hollow as well. The player can either push through the game with purpose and continue fighting to the end, or they can give up. They can quit. This isn't an actual mechanic in the game, but I imagine the only thing keeping the player character from going hollow is the player's motivation. If you quit, you go hollow. You've lost your goal and purpose, and thus slip into madness. You slam your head into a wall till either you break or the wall breaks. You either struggle, suffer, and persist, or give up with no more purpose and goal. You lose your humanity. So that argument helps in the case for difficulty as a narrative tool, but what if difficulty is not a narrative tool and it's just how the game is? Like in Nioh, for example, the difficulty isn't particularly tied to its narrative, and its world and narrative wouldn't be negatively impacted if the game were easier. How does it justify its difficulty then? Well, that's just the type of game they wanted to make. When it comes to intended experience as well, there's no way to look at it other than artistically. All media and art have a target audience. Not all target audiences are made consciously, but with every decision, people are removed from the target audience. Games exist within this scope as well, but the difference between a song or a movie or a book and a game is the interactive aspect. To get through a song or a movie, you just sit there and you see it all. If you're not the target audience and don't enjoy it, that's okay. The only hurdle to the experience was your time, and probably way too many subscription services. For a game, in order to access all its content and its whole experience, you have to actively interface with it to progress. That instantly bars off a large audience. Not everybody has the skill or ability or the time to experience the piece. Just because a person doesn't spend hundreds to thousands of hours gaming, do they now not deserve to experience this piece of art? Should its complexity and barrier of entry be reduced just so everybody can engage with it? Simply, no. Look at books, or movies, or music. There's a spectrum of complexity within all those mediums, and should we request the same from them? Within the complex literature of the classic works, should we demand the authors simplify their language and point out the symbolism for us so that 9-year-old Tyler can understand the complex classic? Should we ask directors to freeze frame every time there's symbolism and turn every single frame of a movie into a YouTube thumbnail full of red circles to help people understand what's going on? Should we ask musicians to keep to a 4/4 time signature because anything other than that is too complex for people who don't listen to music a lot? Obviously, it's no for all of these. What we should do is provide books in audio or braille format. We should have competent subtitles on movies that cover both music and sound cues. I don't know what we do for music, but you get my point. We're not simplifying the work, we're making it accessible without changing the work's foundation. You can transfer this comparison even over to different genres themselves. I'm terrible with horror games, I can hardly handle them. Now, should I try to force every horror developer to have tons of options within their game that removes all the horror elements so that I can see the story? Absolutely not. That's part of the specific experience and part of the horror niche. I'm not a part of that niche, and the games typically aren't for me. And that's okay. I can admit that. Interestingly though, when it comes to an easy mode, you can make the reverse argument. Should all games have hard modes? Obviously the answer is no. You can absolutely argue that some games are too easy for some people, and they need more difficulty modes. Like, some of the 3D Mario games are quite easy. Why can't they have a harder mode? Why can't a casual narrative walking simulator have a hard mode? Because it's as simple as that. Just as games don't all need easy modes, all games do not require hard modes. It's not an experience the creator was trying to create, and sometimes it's as simple as that. Even though games are often given hard modes, they're often extremely poorly implemented. They're usually just enemies doing more damage and becoming absolute bullet sponges. I played Call of Duty World at War on veteran difficulty a few years ago. I played that game a good bit as a kid, so I decided for a replay, let's just try it out. And it was one of the most miserable experiences I've had while gaming. The enemies were bullet sponges, and if I ran into a piece of grass that felt like it could have taken me out. The enemies threw grenades right under my taint at a rate of about 5 grenades per second. It was horrible, and I beat the entire campaign that way. Was it harder? Yes. Was it a good hard mode? God no. It actively deteriorated from the experience. I know that simply for having this opinion on easy modes, I'll get yelled at by many people calling me an elitist and a gatekeeper. If they believe that to be the case, so be it. I know it's not true. I would love for as many people to play these types of games as possible. I absolutely love them, but not everybody will. Some people can be absolutely terrible elitists with the attitude of a dirty butt crack. But that's not everybody. Whenever I see things on the internet Souls-like related and a person having difficulty, a vast majority of the time I see people offering help, giving them tips to help them press on. They're often a very accepting community, cause we've all been humbled by getting beat down hundreds of times in each game. That doesn't mean the phrase get good is any less toxic and unhelpful, but every class has that group of crappy kids. Once again though, I mostly stand with the artistic argument for the side of games should not require an easy mode. I don't want to gatekeep, and I don't want to be an elitist with this opinion. I want as many people to be able to experience as many games as possible, but not at the cost of diversity, uniqueness, and creativity within games. If somebody came to me and they're struggling with a boss in Dark Souls, I'd probably start the conversation with a little laugh, as I remembered how hard that boss destroyed me when I played the game, then go on to tell them stories of my experience and try to help them out. That's the shared experience that's so valued by many that they'll fight to keep it, and they're persistent. After writing this, in order to capture footage, I went and started the Nioh Dragon of the North DLC, and I was about 40 levels or whatever under leveled for the missions, but whatever. And the footage you're watching is of me getting absolutely destroyed by this DLC. And when it came to fighting the boss for this mission, when I first fought him, he felt like he was impossible. No boss in the base game had given me even close to this amount of difficulty. I could not see how he was possible. I had already written everything, but once again it started to make me sympathetic towards the pro easy people, because it was hard. I don't know how many tries it took, but I did it. It took me probably an hour and a half or two to beat him, but I did it. I figured out a strategy. I learned his moves. I changed my equipment and build, though I refused to use the sloth spell. That's too OP. The slow satisfaction as I would get further within the boss each try, that would excite me and keep pushing me. And when I finally beat him, the level went silent and all I could feel was my heart pumping in my chest and my body feeling a little tingly. It was a great feeling. I overcame the obstacle. And that was the experience for all 3 bosses of that DLC. At first, I could not see how any of them were possible. But here I am, having defeated all 3. I did it. So can you.